to our website and check out our at-home center online, or you can check it out in Network as well. Great resources for parenting, and you can go to our website and enroll for the Faith at Home, or that path where we'll get you engaged with various different activities and things for your kids, depending on where they're at in their development. But you can go to our website at blueoaks.cc/at-home, and you can enroll in the Faith at Home plan. All right, let me say a quick word of prayer before we get into the message. God, thanks for this day. Thank you for this time where we have to worship you and to learn from your word. We thank you that we can even come to you right now, that your Holy Spirit is our mediator. Thank you that your Holy Spirit is our teacher. And we pray that you would teach us now, and that your word would make an impact on our lives and our actions and what we do from here. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Today in our society, we live in an age of specialists. We want our kids to be healthy, and so we make sure they have a regular doctor. We expect our teachers to develop our kids intellectually. We expect coaches to develop them athletically. We expect trainers to help them with their muscle development. We expect music teachers to develop them vocally or musically or culturally. We're into specialists in the area of our kids' lives where we want them to be developed, which leads to this question. If I'm a parent, who is responsible for making sure that my kids know about God? Who is responsible for my kids' spiritual development? The Bible talks about this quite directly. If you have your Bible, turn to Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 9. And I would encourage you to underline this passage, highlight this passage, memorize this passage. If you're looking for passages in the Bible to memorize, this is a great one. This is a foundational passage in the Old Testament. This is written by Moses for the people of Israel. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These words right here are the central affirmation of the Old Testament faith. For centuries, this has been called the Shema, from the first words in the phrase, Hear, O Israel. It's recited by every Israelite twice a day, first thing when they get up in the morning, and the last thing before they go to bed. It's marked the beginning of their day, and it marks the end of their day. A child, when they're learning to speak their first words, this is to be their first as a Jew. When a martyr goes to their death, this is to be the final words that a martyr says before dying. It marks the beginning of their life, and it marks the end of their life, and it's everything in between. It's the core of what it means to be a follower of God. And here's what I'd like you to notice that comes directly after these words in Scripture. It's the very next thing that Moses says to the people. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. They're to be in your hearts and in your minds. You can memorize them and know them, live with them. As adults, I want you to live with this stuff, he's saying. And then look what he says. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Moses says, do whatever you need to do. Like tie a string around your finger, put magnets on your refrigerator, put Post-it notes up. Do whatever you need to do. Include these in the decoration of your home. Write them on the door frames of your home so that every time you come in and every time you go out, you're reminded. Teach your kids about God. Talk to your children about God. If you were to ask Moses, whose job is it to make sure that kids grow up hearing about and thinking about and being preoccupied with God, the answer would be real clear. It's up to the parents. Talk to your children, he says. And that doesn't change in the New Testament era. The Apostle Paul says the same thing. He says in the letter to the church at Ephesus that parents are to bring up their children in the instruction and the training, or it's sometimes translated the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And I want to speak real directly to this because I think in our day, a lot of people have gotten the idea that they can kind of outsource the development of their kids spiritually to the church. It's not according to the Scripture. The person whom God will hold primarily responsible for the wise spiritual training and instruction and development of kids is you. It's the parents. Not primarily the church, not primarily a small group leader, not primarily a pastor. If your kids are in a religious school, not primarily their teachers. Now, the church is a very important partner in the spiritual development of kids, but the primary responsibility is with moms and dads, because we're the ones that spend the most of our time with our kids. Now, this will take time, and it will take effort, and it will take work and prayer and sweat and learning and sometimes awkward, embarrassing conversations that will require growth. But a lot of times, the frank truth is, people just don't want to do this. This leads me to a few questions about parenting and children that people sometimes don't even think about or give some kind of serious thought to. And I want to address these real briefly. There are questions around why have kids in the first place? Who should have kids, or how many kids should I have? In ancient times, people often had kids for financial reasons. There was no Social Security in previous centuries. There was no Medicare, so kids were like your 401k. And that has changed to a significant degree. Parents, are kids today financial asset or liability? A liability, right? Big time. All too often in our culture, most people don't even think about these questions. It's just assumed that it's a normal thing for them to have kids. And what's been lost is this biblical notion that being a parent is not an expectation. It's not an obligation. It's not a right. It's a calling. It's a vocation. The idea of a calling or a vocation in the Bible is something that has a life direction. It's a road of serving that I follow, not just because I happen to want to do it, not because someone else expects me to do it, but because I'm responding to what I believe is the mandate of God on my life. The New Testament writers are quite clear about this. God calls some people to be married, and God calls some people to be single. The Apostle Paul clearly affirms that this is a calling on your life. And I believe the same is true of a parent. No one should become a parent automatically, or just because they got married and that's like the next thing you do after you get married. Sometimes God may call you to a form of work or ministry or lifestyle that is not compatible with having children. Or maybe your temperament is such that parenting would not be a good fit for you. And I just want to take this moment to encourage you on this. If you don't have kids yet, don't be pressured by the media. Don't be pressured by our cultural expectations. Don't be pressured by your friends or your family members that are having kids. Don't be pressured by gray-haired people who say it's your job to provide them with a little bundle of joy that they can spoil and cuddle. I mean, if they're desperate to spoil and cuddle a little bundle, buy them a chihuahua. Be real mindful about this. Make it a matter of very mature, deliberate reflection and a matter of prayer. And if you decide to have children, give serious thought to how many kids. Sometimes people choose the size of their family for goofy reasons. I mean, she had 9 kids in her family, and we had 5 kids in my family, so we're just going to kind of split the difference and have 7. And then they're both working full-time, and they rarely actually spend time with their kids. It's just not wise. Parenting is a vocation that ought to be entered into through a real serious process of prayer and consideration and decision-making and commitment. And I know right now about some of you, you're thinking to yourself, well, we never really thought about this, and now we have kids, so what do we do? Well, there's a word in the Bible for you, bummer. No, you could be safely assured that if you have children, God is calling you to be the best parents, the best shapers of those lives that you can possibly be. And so for those of you who have kids, how do you help build faith in your kids? It's a real striking thing, and I don't know how we attach the right weight to this, but everything else that we've talked about in this series, I would say, pales in comparison to this. When a little human being enters into this world, it is the bearer of an immortal soul. It's a life that will one day stand before a just and holy God and will receive an eternal destiny. And those of us who are parents, we are charged to prepare our kids for that moment. It's an unbelievably ironic thing about parenting in our society. Sometimes parents will work real hard to give their kids all these other things. Parents think about what kind of education they want their children to have, what kind of lifestyle they want their children to have, how they're going to help prepare them for college or help prepare them for marriage or for work or for whatever else. And oftentimes parents don't help prepare them for the most significant thing a human being will ever face. It's a fact that we all will face an eternal destiny. One day we all will. If you have kids, how do you help them get ready for that? How do you build faith in your kids? There's a theologian named John Westerhoff. He says, our ultimate goal as parents ought to be to help kids own their faith. I want my children, as they grow up, to love God and to know God and to serve God and to worship God and to give to God, not because I do it, not because they grew up in a church where other people do it, not because someone expects them to do it, but because that's what they freely embrace from the very core of who they are. I want my kids to be able to own their faith down to the very core of their being. And to get there, Westerhoff talks about several stages that kids generally go through in the process of faith development. And I just want to walk through these stages and talk about how we handle them. And I want to ask you again this week, if you're parents, to just grab your bulletin and just kind of jot some notes down, write these down. If you have kids, kind of maybe match them up, see what stage you think they're in right now and how their development is going. All right, the first stage Westerhoff talks about is the experience stage. This is the faith of early childhood. At this point, children are not able to understand the fine points of doctrine, but they often have a sense of openness and sensitivity to experiencing God. This can be quite astounding. One of the biggest mistakes adults make is underestimating a little child's capacity for experiencing God. Sophia Cavaletti is a researcher who's pioneered the study of spirituality in young children. She writes about some remarkable accounts. She finds that children have an amazing perception that far surpasses often what they've already been taught in their life. She writes about a 3-year-old girl who was raised in an atheistic family with no church contact at all, no Bible in the home. She asked her father one day, where did the world come from? And her dad answered in strictly naturalistic scientific terms. In the interest of honesty, he added, there are some people who say all of this comes from a very powerful being, and they call him God. And this little girl just started dancing around the room with joy, saying, I knew what you told me wasn't true. It's him. It's him. Anne Lamott talks about how when she was growing up, her dad was an alcoholic and an atheist, and he made each of the kids make a commitment to him when they were like 2 or 3 years old. And the commitment was that they would never believe in God, because he didn't believe God existed. And he was real mad at God for not existing. He was quite bitter about the whole religious deal. Anne Lamott said that she made that commitment to her dad because he is her dad. She said, but in my heart, I always knew that when I said hello, someone heard. That when I prayed, there was someone who listened. In the Bible, there are many stories. A story about a young man named Samuel, to whom God speaks. A story about children who are just drawn to Jesus like a magnet. And I believe this reflects that just as children are born with this like innate capacity to develop language or this innate capacity to walk, children are born with an innate capacity to relate to God. They're born with the capacity to have experiences with God. We're just wired up that way. And at this experience stage, you want to provide environments and opportunities for your child to experience God on a regular basis. Make sure that the Bible is available to your children. There are great resources for kids. There are illustrated books that tell stories from the Bible. When our girls were real young, we would read the Beginner's Bible. We would read stories from the Beginner's Bible every night before they went to bed. We read it so often that Lily, this was before she could even read herself, but she had memorized a lot of the stories. We would start the sentence and she would finish the story. One of our favorites now that they're 5 and 8 is the Jesus Storybook Bible. And to be honest, in recent months, we've not made reading the Bible at night a priority. And so this is my next step for our family, that I'm going to make this a priority again in our family. I need to make it a priority. And if that means getting ready for bed earlier, we're going to do that. Really, I'll take a few minutes, but it's valuable. The value will be immeasurable. Another thing our kids love is the Bible app for kids. This is an interactive experience with the Bible where they just make the stories come to life. There's a touchable, animated, activities and games and things like that where the kids will actually remember what they're learning about the Bible. It's our responsibility as parents, when our kids are real little, to read to them, to help them to know and understand these stories of the Bible, to hear these stories about God and how God is at work in the lives of these biblical characters. Another thing you can do to help kids experience God is to cultivate the habit of praying for them, especially when they're very little, because prayer often comes more naturally to little children. There's kind of a simplicity of faith to them more than with adults. I'll just give you a real simple thing. Mostly this means just teaching your children to talk to God in an uncensored way about whatever it is that's going on in their mind. Whatever they're thinking about, whatever they're worried about, whatever they're afraid about or concerned about or hoping for, just whatever's going on in them, just talk to God about that. Now you want to gauge the amount of prayer that you do with each kid and the receptivity to that. Different kids will approach prayer in different ways, and you kind of want to be watching that all the time. And to be honest with you, I kind of fail at this on a regular basis. A couple of years ago, I remember praying with one child before bed, and it was a real warm, tender moment with this child. And at the end of the prayer, I said real intently to this child, I love you so much, and I love praying with you. And she looked up at me real intently and said, Daddy, I love you too, as tears welled up in her eyes. And so I went into the other child's room and I did the same thing, and we prayed. And at the end of the prayer, I said, I love you so much, and I love praying with you. And she looked up at me real intently and said, Dad, you've got something in your nose. And I just didn't gauge the receptivity with that child very well. But we need to be praying with them. Help them to have experiences in prayer. I'll just give you another challenge at this point. Make a formal commitment. Make it today, if you've never made it, to pray for your kids on a regular basis. It's a real striking thing. At the end of the Gospels, Jesus is talking to Peter, and he said to him, Peter, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat. He was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. He was about to deny Jesus 3 times. And Jesus knows all about this. Now, if you were Jesus at this point, what would you say to Peter? If I was Jesus at this point, I would give Peter a real good lecture. I would warn him. I would give him a very stern warning about what he's about to do. Jesus, the Son of God, does none of those things. You know what he does? You know what he says to Peter? In Luke 22:31, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat, but I have prayed for you, Peter, that your faith may not fail. You're headed for the biggest crisis of your life, and I'm not just going to give you a bunch of information. I'm going to pray for you. I've prayed for you, Peter. See, there's something inside of us that would love to be able to control people, especially our kids, or to fix our kids. But God has willed that no human being can control another human being, and that's a really good thing. It's a really good thing that you cannot control your kids, although it is frustrating at times. Maybe the single most powerful thing that you can do for your kids is to pray for them. And I just want to encourage you right now that if you've never made a formal commitment about that, make it. I challenge you to make a commitment. Say, I'm going to pray for my kids every day. And if it would help you to do that, write it down right now. Write it down as the next step. I will pray for blank. I will pray for Amron. I will pray for Lily, or whatever your kid's name is. I will pray for you every day for as long as I live. Prayer is a very important part of a child's learning to experience God. Look for chances to talk to your kids about what's going on in life and to pray for them for whatever's happening in life. When you see beauty in nature, just pause for a moment and just say, God, thank you so much for this beauty. Express gratitude at meal times. Take the opportunity before a competition to just stop and to pray for your child or for whatever that competition is. One of the best questions that you can ask your kids is, how can I pray for you? How can I pray for you? And let the Holy Spirit guide you in that. God really does want to partner with you in the spiritual formation of your kids. Just ask Him to help you how to lead in this area with your kids. Here's something else about providing an environment that's just a rich experience for our kids. If your kids are at the age of roughly the elementary school years, I would say be real firm in your commitment to having them experience Blue Oaks Kids on a regular basis. As you heard Allie mention earlier we're launching a new curriculum. It's really a new strategy in our kids ministry called Orange. This is going to help us partner with you to bring the Bible to life for your kids. And I just want to show you a quick video that kind of expresses the philosophy for this curriculum for our elementary age, which is called 252 Basics. Check this out.
I cannot stay silent. I will not hold back. I want to open up and let the things roll out. I'm overwhelmed by your love, your faithfulness at all times. When my heart was hurting, you made things all so right. I'm never gonna stop, never gonna stop. I wanna shout it out that I love Jesus, tell the world that God is good. Sing a song that makes me happy, shout out loud that God is good. Yeah. And I cannot stay silent. I will not hold back. I want to open up and let the things roll out. I'm overwhelmed by your love, your faithfulness at all times. When my heart was hurting, you made things all so right. I'm never gonna stop, never gonna stop. I wanna shout it out that I love Jesus, tell the world that God is good. Sing a song that makes me happy, shout out loud that God is good.
All right, so my challenge to you is, if you have kids in our Blue Oaks Kids or students, to get your kids into this consistent pattern of attendance and engagement and involvement in Blue Oaks Kids, which is probably, I would say, the greatest help that you'll get in the young years in the development of your kids. It's the most important parenting assignment that you will have. So just get real clear on this one. But one more thing in this area, to anyone here who works with or has worked with Blue Oaks Kids, if you've led a small group, if you teach lessons, rock babies, herd crawlers around, plan programs, work with or watch or pray over these kids, every single parent in this church owes you a debt of gratitude and honor that is beyond our ability to express to you. So we are so grateful. All right, the second stage or phase that faith development involves is what Westerhoff calls affiliation. And this is the stage at which relationships begin to become extremely important to the life of a kid. At a certain age, your kids no longer believe that you are the smartest and most powerful being in the universe. And that's a sad day when it comes, but that day will come. As a kid gets older, generally they hit the age of somewhere around 10 or 11 or 12 or something like that, where they hit this affiliation stage. This is characterized most strongly by their desire for a sense of belonging or a sense of connection. This is the part of their identity that is being formed. The young person here wants to connect. They want to be a part of something. They want to be a part of a group or a community that's bigger than himself or herself. And of course, part of that relational connection becomes more direct and more intimate connection with God and in a community of faith. But when this is absent, though, in a child's life, this is when cults and gangs and groups that offer kind of pseudo community start to look attractive, because there's just this deep need that we have to belong. I've talked to a lot of parents over the years, and usually when a parent whose kids are already grown up kind of reflect back on their parenting, they wish they would have spent more time teaching their kids about the importance of selecting friends wisely during this stage of their lives, because the friendship factor is just huge. If you're a parent and you want to help your kids spiritually, at this point in their life, teach them how to select friends. And get to know your kids' friends. Make your home as available as you can and as a meeting place for your kids and for your kids' friends so that you can actually get to know them. Now, I'm very aware that this could be a big hassle in your home. I remember the first time that we had a sleepover at our house. What's the one thing kids never do at a sleepover? Sleep. It's kind of ironically named. But I know parents where, because of the noise or because of the cleanup hassle afterwards or because of, someone might spill on their furniture or whatever reason, they rarely, if ever, want other kids in their home. And I'd say that's a bad idea. Listen, furniture it's not going to last forever. The noise is going to go. But the soul of your child is an eternal thing. And at this age, that little group that he or she is running around with will become a huge influence in their life. So get to know them. Ask questions about them. Help your kids think wisely about their relational choices. Also at this age, your child needs to have some connections, some affiliations with people who are different than them. With the under-resourced, maybe they need to be a part of a serving community. Our culture will try to turn kids at this age into mall rats where they just run around obsessed with their own desires. On the other hand, there's often an idealism and a willingness to give that can put adults to shame. Find ways that your kids can get involved in meaningful service in like a serving type of community. Again, parents, this is where we can partner with the church. Through our kids and student ministries, we have opportunities to serve. One other aspect of this era, because kids are growing older, they need to hear you speak directly about your spiritual life. They need you to talk about your experience with God. Don't wait until you have all the answers. Don't wait until you think that your spiritual life is in like a perfect order. This was written by Ken Davis. He writes that he doesn't have a lot of regrets in his life, but this is one of them. I'd love another shot to raise my kids to love and honor God. Too often I avoided overt expressions of faith in my daily life. I was often quite comfortable expressing my faith from a platform, reluctant to do so in more intimate settings. Many meals in our house went unblessed with prayer. I made several attempts to start family devotions, but they never lasted long. I rarely said the beautiful words, "Praise the Lord," in front of my family. I failed to glorify God verbally in everyday life in front of my children. I wish I could do it. Parents, talk to your kids about your life with God. Talk to them about your experience with God. Talk to them about your faith journey. Talk to them about how you came to faith. Tell them sometimes that when you've blown it, you've received God's mercy. Tell them sometimes when you're just so grateful because of God's provision in your life. Tell them, when God prompts you to do something and you do it even though you're afraid. Tell them about the doubt that you have, because they have doubts. And tell them how you handle that. Moses says, talk about God when you rise up and when you lie down, when you're at home and when you're on the road. Like tie a string around your finger, put a post-it note on the refrigerator, do something so that you remember to talk to your kids about God. All right, that's the affiliation stage. The third stage that Westerhoff talks about is what he calls the searching stage. And this is the scariest one. This is the level that parents most often fear when kids start to question everything. When kids become aware of what life is like in this world, they may think, if God is an all-loving and all-powerful God, then why do so many people suffer in the world? How do I know that there really is a God? And these are not questions with easy answers, so don't pretend like they are. And these are questions that thoughtful people of faith have wrestled with for a very long time. A lot of what kids need is just simply a safe place where it's okay to ask these types of questions. And you don't have to have all the answers. You can just tell them how it is, Tell them, this is actually something that I struggle with too. And you can talk to them about how you struggle with those questions too, and how you've actually chosen to put your faith in God even though you struggle with those. If a resource would be helpful to you, Lee Strobel has written a couple books, The Case for Christ and The Case for Faith, that address a lot of these types of questions. It'd be helpful for you to read these books so that you have answers to these questions. And both of these books are also available in a student version as well, so if you want to buy a gift for your child and give that to them, these books have helped millions of people. Well, sometimes a child will get turned off or even hostile toward faith, which leads to an agonizing question for many parents. What do I do when my child says he doesn't want to go to church? What do I do when my child says, I don't want to go to Blue Oaks Kids, or I don't want to go to Blue Oaks Students? And I want to say, when they're real small, parents can and should make the decision for them. I would say attendance for kids should be a non-optional deal in their early years. And as they get older, say in high school or something like that, the issue gets way more complex. I just want to give you 2 responses to avoid if this issue comes up with you and one of your kids. Sometimes a kid will say, I don't want to go to church, and the parents will say, okay, and they just let them drop out. And I don't think that's a good idea, because they were made to know God, and they were made to live in community and connect with other people in a community of faith. Sometimes a kid will say, I don't want to go to church, and the parents will say, well, you're going to go anyway. And the child will ask the same question that they ask all the time, why? And the parents will give the time-honored answer that our parents used to give to us, which we swore we would never give to our kids, because I said so. And I would say that that's not generally a good response in this situation. And for the most part, healthy, bright, independent, strong-minded kids don't respond to that answer by saying, well, that makes sense. Because you said so, of course, thanks for helping me answer my problem. Almost always for kids, there's a reason that lies underneath that response. Almost always at some level, their resistance is kind of a cry for engagement by the parents. And of course, part of them would never admit to that. They will deny that completely. Part of them doesn't want to talk about it. Part of them just wants to push you away. But there's part of them that deeply hungers after God, because that's just part of every human life. Although we try to stifle it sometimes, and sometimes we succeed. There's a part of your child that deeply needs and wants you to be involved in their life and what's going on in their heart. And that's the part that you've got to listen to. And that's the part that you've got to stick with. That's the part where you have to be very sensitive in how you address it. We need to be patiently exploring that with our kids, whatever's going on in their heart. And maybe they have big doubts. And maybe they just need a safe place to talk. And we need to talk about that stuff. Maybe their resistance is because they're involved in some pattern of destructive behavior that's leaving them with this sense of guilt or shame. When you talk about what's going on in their life, maybe you're going to need some help with that. Often I would say their resistance to being involved in church is not about a lot of those things. I would say probably more often it's about being around all the other kids. The single most common reason underneath this kind of resistance, I don't want to go to church, is I don't have friends. I go there, but I don't have friends, or I feel left out. And let me just say a word about this one, because this is so common. Developing group friendships is one of the toughest and most important challenges in life. There will always be, anytime there's a group of young people together, a certain level of cliques and barriers and challenges that we will have to fight through, that kids will have to fight through. That's true of any place. It's true of school, it's true of church, it's true of any sports team they get involved with. I'm sure it goes on in our church as well. But I know our leaders know this, and they pray about this, and they try to create an inclusive community. But this is just a part of the human dynamic. And it may well be that I need to work on coaching my kids through this. And this actually may require growth on my part. It may not be real easy for me to do this because I've not done it. But I need to help my kids understand you need to keep attending. You need to keep work at developing relationships because this is just a part of life. You need to learn it. You need to keep working at it, even though it's a struggle. And you might need to get creative with this. I know a senior pastor of another church whose kids have a really hard time connecting in the student ministry at their church, and so his kids found another church. It's a great church. It's a larger, thriving student ministry, but they find it a whole lot easier to connect there. Is that an okay thing? Absolutely. I mean, if my kids were at this place and they found another community that was a good Christian community where they could plug in, absolutely. And this leads to the last thing I want to say to parents, and this is the most important thing. Whatever else you do or don't do as parents, whatever else you work hard at giving to your parents, don't neglect this one. Don't neglect their spiritual lives, because there's so much at stake. Don't neglect the soul of your child. Karen Maines, she writes about a Sunday school teacher who's explaining to the kids about how to get to heaven. And it's a real basic question-answer format. So she asks them, if I sold my house and my car and had a big garage sale and gave all of the money to the church, would that get me into heaven? And all the kids shouted, no. If I cleaned the church every day, mowed the yard, kept everything neat and tidy, would that get me into heaven? No. If I was kind to animals and gave candy to little children and loved my husband, would that get me into heaven? No. Well, then how can I get to heaven? The 5-year-old boy shouted, you've got to be dead. Don't miss the obvious there. Yeah, you've got to be dead. And we don't like to talk about this much. But that will be true for all of us. You've got to be dead. You've got to be dead. And the children that we love so much, whose entrance into this world fills us with more joy and hope and emotion than just about anything else that we face in this life, they will someday face their eternity. And in eternal scheme, this whole eternal scheme of things, the day is coming when they will face their eternity. Each of the kids, yours and mine, they will hear from a holy, just, loving God about their eternal destiny. And the thought of missing one of my kids in eternity is just unbearable. If you're a parent, I'm telling you, do whatever you need to do. And if you need to get your own life with God squared away, get your own life with God squared away. But those little eyes are watching us all the time. If we're not living what it is that we're trying to teach, we're going to mess up our kids pretty bad. If there are patterns in your life that need to get squared away, if things are not right between you and God, do whatever you need to do to get it right. There's just too much at stake. Talk to your kids about their faith and about their future and about God. And if it's awkward or hard or embarrassing or you feel like you don't have all the answers, talk to them anyway. You're the parent. And make the commitment to pray for those little lives every day. We live in a world where parents think so much about parenting and working hard to give so many gifts to their kids that will one day fade away. There's only one gift that we can give to our kids that will never fade. And that will last for all of eternity. So give that. And give it the best that you can. All right, we're going to pray now. And I just want to pray for the parents. And then we're going to hear a testimony from Elisa Harrington before we celebrate communion. Would you pray for them? God, I just want to pray for the parents in this room that you would give us great wisdom as we raise our kids through these various different stages. God, I pray that you would give us patience and kindness and love. God, help us to discipline in a way that honors you. And God, I think of my kids at the age of 5 and 8, and sometimes the discipline is where I struggle the most because I want to discipline them and I want them to know what's right, but I don't want to crush their spirit. So I pray that you just give me wisdom in that. Give us wisdom in those early years. God, as they go into the middle school years, into that time of adolescence, I pray that you would give us understanding, help us to be very sensitive in how we handle conversations, help us to model our faith, help us to create safe places where kids can come and answer or ask their questions. God, help us to nurture their development all the way into their adult life. God, help us to create an environment where they know you and love you. I know that needs to be modeled by us, God, so help us with that. We need your Holy Spirit to guide us in this parenting. Help us to commit to praying for them throughout our life, because you care more about them than we do. Help us to remember that their spiritual development, their eternal destiny, is the most important thing that we can invest in. So help us to put a little bit of time into that every day. And we ask all this in Jesus' name.
Hi, my name's Lisa Harrington. You probably recognize me as the morning greeter that invades your personal space. I'm here to tell you some of my testimony, some of what I've been through as we look toward communion today. Many of you might not know that that I've come from a drug background. I started doing drugs when I was 14, and I didn't stop doing drugs until I was 44. And I have begged God almost every night of those years to please stop that. I could not stop that addiction. And so God never stopped it. So I thought God never heard my prayer. I grew up basically not wanting to be me. And I can't stress that enough, really. I wanted to be anybody but me. I hated myself so much. Eventually, I learned that wasn't true. Eventually, I find that there's a Jordan River, and that I've got to put my foot in the water, and I've got to trust that God's gonna do his part. He's gonna do the rest. God's gonna catch me. And so through a series of events, that's exactly what happened. I put my foot in the Jordan River. I had to surrender over my issue to God, and even in that didn't stop the problem. I believe that I had surrendered my life to Christ, but I continued to struggle with sin. So it wasn't until I recognized that I wasn't admitting powerlessness over sin. So it needed to be more than just being powerless over sin. For me, I had to name it. And so for me, it was naming, Lord, I'm powerless over drugs and alcohol. And I need you, God. I need you, God. I surrender this to you. And as I did that, things began to change. And I will be 6 years clean and sober on September 28th. All thanks to, it's all glory and honor to the Lord. Now I'll tell you what I found is that God has done exactly what he says he's going to do. He has been faithful to me at every step of the way. He has caught me. He has helped me across the water. It hasn't been easy, but I'll tell you what, he's walked that road with me and carried me wherever he just did things for me that I couldn't do for myself. So, but it was admitting powerlessness over sin, powerlessness over drugs and alcohol, and in admitting that, God could do for me then what I couldn't do for myself.
Thank you, Lisa, for wanting to share that. And I think it's a great way to enter into this time of communion. If you've never actually surrendered your life to Christ, maybe like Lisa, you've kind of given your life to him, but you've not really understood what that means. You've accepted him, but you've never actually surrendered. When you surrender, that's when you find victory. And so maybe some of you need to do that right now before you come forward to take communion. Just surrender your life. Just tell him, I have this sin in my life that I can't control. Like all the willpower I can muster will not do anything to fight this temptation. So I need your power to be available in my life. And that same power that raised Christ from the dead can be available to you to overcome any temptation and any sin that you face. So I'd say take this time right now and just spend with God. If there's something that you're dealing with, do business with God. And then when you're ready, come forward and take communion. And communion represents Christ's body and Christ's blood that was broken and shed for us, so we can have this new life, this new path. We can have a new focus, a new mind, a new heart, Jesus in life. And so come forward and take that and remember. And the person that's serving you will say, this is Christ's body broken for you. And this is Christ's blood shed for you. So take the bread and dip it into the cup and remember the cost that was paid for your eternal life. And it wasn't just your eternal life, it was so that we can have life here and now. Let me pray as we get ready to do that. God, we're so grateful for the sacrifice that Jesus made so that we can have life in all its fullness here and now, but so that we can actually have hope for our eternal destiny. And we just remember that now. We just pause and reflect on that most significant moment in history. Christ just paid for us, for my sin was completely removed as far as the east is from the west. You've cleared the slate. You tell us that you remember it and more. And God, maybe there's someone in this room who hasn't surrendered their life. They haven't given up this fight. I pray that they would do it. And that you would meet them in a powerful way. Just release them from any of that shame or guilt that's just been weighing on them. We're so grateful that you do that in our lives. You free us from ourselves and from our sin. So I pray that we would live in that freedom. I pray that we would